My name is Alara Bennett, and I was 29 years old when my parents sold me to a dying man for a $48 million business deal. The night everything finally exploded, 14 people were sitting inside the Callaway dining room arguing over land that nobody wanted a year earlier. Lawyers. Executives. My parents. His family. And my husband. Sitting quietly at the far end of the table like a man attending his own funeral. The television behind us was flashing breaking news. A massive oil reserve had just been discovered in Oklahoma. And somehow, the land everyone once mocked belonged to Adrian Callaway. The same Adrian doctors said wouldn't live long. His brother slid legal papers toward him. "Sign it tonight," he said. "Before this gets complicated." Then my sister Claire whispered, "It makes more sense if someone healthy controls it." Healthy. Nobody defended him. Not even me. At first. Then Adrian smiled in this tired, painful way and said something that silenced the entire room. "At some point all of you buried me before I died." And that was the exact moment I dropped a brown file onto the table. "Proof," I said quietly. "But before I take you back to where all this started, do me a favor. Subscribe, give this video a thumbs up if this story resonates with you, and comment what time you're watching from." I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in a family that used to matter. When I was little, Bennett Industrial Supply felt untouchable. My father owned warehouses across the state, and trucks carrying our company logo moved through the city day and night like they owned the roads. I remember sitting in the back seat of his black Escalade while he pointed proudly at buildings with our last name painted across them. "That belongs to us," he used to say. Back then my mother smiled more. Back then nobody whispered behind closed doors after dinner. And back then, I still believed money protected families from falling apart. I was wrong. The collapse happened slowly. That's the dangerous thing about losing everything. It rarely arrives all at once. First came delayed payments. Then layoffs. Then one warehouse quietly shut down. Then another. But inside our house, my parents kept pretending everything was normal. My father, Warren Bennett, stopped sleeping properly. Some nights I'd walk downstairs around 2 in the morning and find him sitting alone in the dark kitchen with spreadsheets spread across the table and half-finished whiskey beside his laptop. My mother handled things differently. Denise Bennett believed appearances mattered more than reality. She still hosted charity dinners. Still wore expensive perfume. Still smiled at church like nothing was wrong. But inside the house, every conversation somehow became my fault. Because unlike my sisters, I disappointed her. Claire became a cardiologist exactly the way my mother wanted. Precise. Controlled. Practical. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and make people feel judged without even speaking. Naomi became a pediatric surgeon. Softer than Claire. Kinder too. But Naomi had a habit of going quiet whenever conflict started, like silence could somehow keep her safe. And then there was me. Alara Bennett. The daughter who studied petroleum geoscience instead of medicine. "You chose rocks over people," my mother used to say whenever we argued. I used to laugh at that sentence in college. Now I think she actually meant it. The truth is, I loved geology from the beginning. I loved field work. Dusty roads. Survey maps spread across truck hoods. The smell of dry soil after rain. There was something honest about the earth. Pressure buried things deep for years, and then suddenly one crack exposed everything hidden underneath. Come to think of it, families work the same way. At 29, I thought my biggest problem was finding stable work after graduation and figuring out whether my boyfriend Lucas and I were finally ready to move in together. Then my mother called one Thursday evening and told me to come home immediately. No explanation. That alone felt strange. When I walked into the house, the air felt heavy. My father was sitting at the dining table staring at papers he wasn't reading. My mother had both hands wrapped tightly around a coffee mug even though the coffee inside had already gone cold. Nobody smiled when I entered. That scared me more than yelling would've. What happened? I asked. My mother looked at my father first. Then back at me. Elara, she said carefully, you need to prepare yourself for something important. I remember laughing nervously. Okay. Then she said it. You're getting married next month. The room went completely still. I honestly thought she was joking at first. Excuse me. My father slid a folder slowly across the table. Inside were debt reports. Loan notices. Pending lawsuits. The company was collapsing far worse than I realized. Then my mother finally said the name that changed my entire life. Adrian Calloway. I stared at her. The sixth son of the Calloway Empire. And suddenly, nothing in my life felt safe anymore. I laughed when they first told me. Not because it was funny. Because it sounded insane. The sound actually echoed awkwardly through the dining room before dying completely. And then I realized something that made my stomach turn cold. Nobody else was laughing. My father sat quietly at the end of the table rubbing his forehead like he hadn't slept in days. My mother kept staring at me with this strange expression that looked halfway between guilt and determination. That was the moment fear started creeping in. Wait. I said slowly. You're serious? My father finally pushed the folder closer toward me. I opened it. Debt reports. Bank notices. Loan extensions. Pending lawsuits. Every page looked worse than the last. The company wasn't struggling. It was drowning. Bennett Industrial is weeks away from collapsing, my father said quietly. His voice sounded older than usual. Like the weight of those papers had physically aged him. I looked back down at the numbers. Millions owed. Missed payments. Emergency restructuring plans. Then my mother finally said the sentence that changed my life forever. Callaway Energy offered us a partnership agreement worth $48 million. I looked up immediately. The Callaways weren't just wealthy. They were untouchable in Oklahoma. Oil contracts. Transport companies. Political connections. The kind of family people mentioned carefully at business dinners. For one brief second, I thought maybe things weren't hopeless after all. Then my mother kept talking. There's one condition. Something inside me already knew. I don't know how to explain that feeling properly. It was like standing near train tracks and hearing something coming before you could see it. I stared at her. What condition? Silence. Then my father answered instead. Their son Adrian needs a wife. The room felt smaller instantly. I blinked once. Twice. And then I laughed again because my brain genuinely refused to process what I just heard. You can't be serious. Nobody answered. That silence hurt more than the words. I looked directly at my mother. You're selling me? Her face changed immediately. No, she snapped sharply. We're asking you to save this family. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped loudly against the floor. You want me to marry a man I've never met because your business is failing? You think this is easy for us? My father asked. Easy? I almost shouted. You're talking about my entire life. Then another thought hit me. I looked directly at my mother. Why me? More silence. Why not Claire? Why not Naomi? My mother's eyes hardened instantly. Because your sisters already sacrificed for this family. That sentence landed like a slap. Claire became a cardiologist. Naomi became a surgeon. They came back and helped support this family. We spent years paying for your geology degree while you ran around deserts chasing rocks. My throat tightened. Petroleum geoscience isn't useless. Right now it is, she replied coldly. That hurt more than I expected. Not because she insulted my career. Because deep down, I realized she'd probably believed that for years. That same night, Lucas invited me to dinner. I almost canceled. I should have. It would have hurt less. When I arrived at the restaurant, candles lined the table and his friends were hiding smiles near the bar. Lucas looked nervous in the sweetest way, like he'd practiced his speech 100 times already. Then he stood up holding a small velvet box. My chest immediately started collapsing. Elara Bennett, he said softly, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. People nearby started clapping quietly. And all I could think about was Adrian Calloway. The dying stranger my parents already promised me to. Lucas opened the ring box. I stared at it. At him. At the future I wanted so badly it physically hurt. And then I destroyed both of us with one word. No. Everything around us went silent. Lucas looked confused more than angry. You planned a future with me for 4 years, he said quietly. His voice cracked slightly near the end. Don't turn into a stranger in one night. But sitting there across from him, I already had. The emotional pressure at home became unbearable after that dinner with Lucas. It felt like the walls inside our house were slowly closing in around me. My mother cried almost every night now. Loud enough for everyone to hear. Sometimes I'd wake up around midnight and hear her in the kitchen talking to my father in this shaky voice like she was the only victim in the situation. What choice do we have? She kept saying. My father handled things differently. Warren Bennett stopped pretending everything was okay. Some nights I'd come downstairs for water and find him sitting alone at the dining table with a half-empty whiskey bottle beside stacks of unpaid invoices. The television would still be running quietly in the background, but he never looked at it. He just stared at numbers like they personally betrayed him. And somehow, every conversation circled back to me. Every problem. Every unpaid debt. Every employee they might lose. Me. The atmosphere inside the house became so tense that even breathing felt loud. Claire made it worse. Honestly, I think Claire convinced herself she was being practical. That was the scary part. She didn't see herself as cruel. She saw herself as realistic. One night, about 2 weeks before the wedding, she walked into my bedroom without knocking while I was packing clothes into a suitcase. The room smelled faintly like dust and old cardboard because I'd started boxing up pieces of my life slowly. Books. College notes. Framed pictures with Lucas I couldn't bring myself to throw away yet. Claire noticed the engagement ring sitting on my dresser immediately. Lucas had mailed it back after I refused him. Still unopened. Still sitting there like evidence of a life I ruined myself. Claire picked up the small velvet box and turned it slowly in her hand. Do you think you're the only person in this family who gave up something? She asked calmly. I zipped my suitcase harder than necessary. You chose your life, I replied. Claire shook her head slowly. No. I chose responsibility. Something about the way she said it irritated me instantly. Like love and sacrifice were the same thing. Like misery automatically made someone noble. She walked closer and handed the ring back to me. You'll survive this, she said quietly. People survive worse than unhappy marriages. I stared at her after she left the room. And honestly, that sentence scared me more than yelling would've. Because Claire actually believed it. Naomi was different. She avoided conflict so much it almost looked painful. During family dinners she barely spoke anymore. Every time my mother brought up the wedding, Naomi's eyes dropped toward her plate immediately. Like silence could somehow protect her from guilt. The morning of the wedding felt unreal. Rain tapped softly against the bedroom windows while makeup artists moved around the house downstairs and my mother barked instructions at people every few minutes. I stood in front of the mirror wearing a wedding dress I never wanted. And for the first time in my life, I genuinely didn't recognize myself. Naomi stood behind me adjusting the back of the dress quietly. Her hands were trembling. I noticed because Naomi never shook. Not even during stressful situations. Then suddenly she whispered, "You can still leave." I turned around so fast the fabric shifted awkwardly around my legs. What? Her eyes filled instantly. For 1 second. One tiny second. I thought she actually meant it. I thought maybe somebody in this family was finally going to choose me over the business. Then footsteps echoed outside the bedroom door. Naomi stepped back immediately like she'd been caught doing something dangerous. Her expression changed. "Walls back up again." "Mom's waiting," she said softly. And just like that, the moment disappeared. A few hours later, I married Adrian Calloway. And deep down, I already felt like my old life was gone forever. The wedding felt empty for two powerful families. That was the strangest part. Not the flowers. Not the expensive venue. Not even the fact I was marrying a man I barely knew. It was the atmosphere. Cold. Careful. Transactional. Like everyone attended a merger instead of a marriage. The ceremony took place inside a private country club outside Tulsa. White roses lined the aisle. Soft piano music played in the background. Servers carried champagne between tables while executives whispered business updates near the bar. Nobody looked emotional. Nobody cried. Half the guests were lawyers. I remember standing beside Adrian during the vows wondering if he hated this as much as I did. He barely spoke the entire evening. Quiet. Detached. Polite. Like a man surviving something instead of celebrating it. Even our first dance lasted less than 2 minutes before Grayson pulled my father aside to discuss contracts again. That told me everything I needed to know about the marriage. After the ceremony, Claire hugged me tightly for the cameras. Then she leaned close enough for only me to hear her. "At least you still have time to give him a child." The sentence confused me immediately. I pulled back to look at her, but Claire just smiled calmly like she hadn't said anything strange at all. At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. I did later. Adrian drove us to the Calloway estate himself that night. Rain streaked softly across the windshield while the city lights disappeared behind us. Neither of us spoke much during the drive. The silence felt awkward at first, then strangely heavy. The Calloway property was massive. Stone gates. Long private roads. Fountains glowing beneath soft garden lights. The kind of place built to remind people how wealthy the owners were. And honestly, for one stupid second, I thought maybe my life wouldn't be completely miserable. Then Adrian turned down a narrow side road behind the main house. Toward a smaller detached guest house near the edge of the estate. I frowned immediately. "Where are we going?" "That's where I stay," he said calmly. I looked at him. "You don't live in the mansion." A faint smile crossed his face. "Not anymore." That answer bothered me more than it should have. Inside, the guest house felt quiet and strangely lonely. Not ugly. Actually beautiful in a simple way. Bookshelves. Old records stacked beside a vintage player. A faint smell of cedarwood and coffee. But it didn't feel temporary. It felt abandoned. Like someone slowly disappeared there. Adrian loosened his tie slowly and sat down near the window before finally speaking again. 3 years ago I was diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, he said quietly. I stared at him. Progressive lung scarring. His voice stayed calm while explaining it, which somehow made it sadder. The doctors originally estimated 3 to 5 years. Suddenly Claire's comment made sense. At least you still have time to give him a child. God. I looked away immediately. Adrian noticed. It's okay, he said softly. You don't have to pretend this isn't uncomfortable. Then he told me the rest. After his father Malcolm died, everything changed inside the family. His older brother Grayson took control of the company. His sister Evelyn stopped involving him in meetings. People started speaking around him instead of to him. At dinner one night, Grayson actually said, "There's no point restructuring future ownership around Adrian's situation." Situation. Not brother. Not son. Not life. Situation. I could actually hear the bitterness hiding beneath Adrian's calm voice now. He looked toward the dark window quietly. Eventually I stopped entering rooms where people already erased me. The sentence hit harder than he probably realized. Then after a long silence, Adrian looked at me and gave a small tired smile. They married me off because it looks better publicly, he said quietly. A dying man with a wife sounds less tragic than a dying man abandoned by his family. That was the exact moment something shifted inside me. Because suddenly I understood the truth neither of us wanted to say out loud. We were both victims. And somehow, that made me feel less alone. Weeks turned into months. And somewhere in the middle of all that silence, Adrian stopped feeling like a stranger. Neither of us rushed closeness. Honestly, I think we were both too emotionally exhausted for pretending. So instead, we built something slower. Quiet breakfasts in the small kitchen behind the estate. Late-night conversations on the porch while Oklahoma wind moved through the trees. Shared loneliness that slowly started feeling less lonely. Sometimes Adrian talked about books his father used to read to him when he was younger. Sometimes I explained geological surveys just because he actually listened when I spoke. That surprised me more than it should have. Most people waited for their turn to talk. Adrian listened like what you said mattered. And come to think of it, that may have been the first time in years I felt truly seen inside my own life. There were small moments too. Tiny things most people wouldn't notice. The way he started making coffee for both of us every morning after learning I hated overly sweet creamers. The way he always left the porch light on if I worked late. The way he apologized every time he coughed too hard, like his illness was somehow inconvenient for everyone else. That part broke me slowly. Because Adrian had spent so long being treated like a burden that he apologized for existing before anyone could blame him first. Then one night everything changed. I woke up around 2 in the morning and noticed the other side of the bed was empty. At first I thought Adrian couldn't sleep again. But then I saw the front door slightly open. Cold air drifted inside the guest house. I grabbed my sweater and stepped outside quietly. The lights inside the main estate were still on. That immediately felt wrong. As I got closer, voices carried through one of the open dining room windows. Grayson. Evelyn. 2 attorneys. And standing silently outside the window. Adrian. He wasn't moving. Wasn't speaking. Just listening. The board needs stability before he declines further, Grayson said inside. One of the attorneys answered immediately. If his condition worsens before probate finalizes, it simplifies transfer authority. Simplifies. The word hit me like ice water. Like Adrian's life was paperwork. A business inconvenience. Something temporary they needed to organize properly. Then Evelyn spoke softly. Honestly, I think that sentence changed the way I saw their entire family forever. Honestly, she said quietly, it may be kinder if this ends quickly. My stomach turned instantly. I looked at Adrian. He stood completely still, hearing every word. No anger. No shock. That was the worst part. Just exhaustion. Like this conversation wasn't surprising anymore. Like he'd already heard versions of it 100 times before. Then Adrian suddenly laughed under his breath. A quiet, painful laugh. I should probably leave before they start discussing funeral flowers too, he said softly. That sentence destroyed me. Not because it was dramatic. Because it sounded practiced. Like humor was the only way he survived humiliation anymore. I remember reaching for his hand without thinking. His fingers felt cold against mine. Adrian looked down at our hands like he genuinely wasn't used to someone choosing to comfort him. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Inside the mansion, the conversation continued like nothing important was happening. Lawyers discussing timelines. Inheritance structures. Corporate leadership. While the man they were planning around stood outside listening to people erase him in real time. We walked back toward the guest house slowly. Halfway there Adrian finally spoke again. You know the strange part? He asked quietly. I shook my head. I don't even hate them anymore. His voice sounded tired. I just got tired of trying to matter. And right there beneath the cold Oklahoma night sky. My heart broke for him completely. The strange thing is, even after my parents destroyed my life for that business deal, the partnership still started collapsing. Slowly at first. Then all at once. Projects failed. Investments disappeared. Meetings became tense. People stopped pretending things were under control. The Callaways blamed my father. My father blamed market conditions. My mother blamed stress. And somehow, every disaster still found its way back to me. I remember one evening in particular. Rain hammered softly against the guest house windows while Adrian sat at the kitchen counter sorting through old paperwork from his father's estate. I was making pasta when my phone started vibrating across the counter. Mom. The second I answered, I heard crying. Elara. Denise Bennett sounded breathless. We're in serious trouble. I closed my eyes immediately. What happened now? The investors are pulling out. Your father is trying to keep the company afloat, but... She stopped talking suddenly. Then her voice changed. Harder. Sharper. You're living with billionaires, she snapped. Don't tell me your husband doesn't own something valuable. I went completely still. That sentence settled over me like cold water. Not once did she ask if I was happy. Not once did she ask how Adrian was doing. Just money. Always money. And right there in that tiny kitchen behind the Callaway mansion, I finally understood something I should have realized months earlier. I had never stopped being a transaction. Even after the wedding. Even after the sacrifice. I was still something they planned to profit from. Around the same time, Adrian started mentioning strange activity near his farmland. Surveying companies. At first it sounded harmless. Just workers checking nearby properties. Large drilling trucks parked along back roads. Seismic equipment scattered across neighboring fields. We assumed energy companies were probably looking for land investments. Oklahoma wasn't exactly unfamiliar with oil exploration. Then one afternoon I drove out to the farm to bring Adrian lunch. The air smelled dry and dusty from weeks without rain. Adrian was repairing fencing near the western side of the property while I wandered closer toward one of the excavation areas nearby. That was when I noticed it. Dark residue mixed beneath loose dirt. Unusual sediment layering. Partially hidden survey stakes buried near a shallow trench. I froze instantly. Because I recognized the signs. Not clearly. Not enough to confirm anything. But enough to make my heart start pounding. I crouched slowly and rubbed some of the soil between my fingers. Adrian noticed my expression immediately. "What?" he asked. I shook my head too quickly. "Probably nothing." But that night after he fell asleep, I secretly collected samples from the farm and locked myself in the small study room inside the guest house. The first results came back inconclusive. Possible petroleum indicators. Nothing confirmed. For almost 2 weeks I convinced myself I was imagining things. Then the purchase offers started. Neighboring landowners suddenly received massive cash offers from energy companies. Men in expensive trucks started appearing around town asking questions quietly. Some families sold immediately. Others refused. And honestly, that was when fear entered the story. Real fear. Because companies don't spend millions chasing nothing. I secretly contacted my former university professor, Lydia Mercer. She taught advanced petroleum mapping during my final year in college and was one of the smartest women I'd ever met. I mailed additional samples without telling Adrian. 3 days later, she called me personally. Her voice sounded unusually serious. "Elara. If your data is correct, secure ownership immediately before you tell anyone." I sat down slowly at the edge of the bed. My pulse started racing. How serious is this? There was a long pause on the phone. Then Lydia answered quietly. Serious enough to destroy families. And suddenly, everything around me started making terrifying sense. 3 weeks later, everything exploded during dinner inside the Callaway estate. And honestly, the entire evening felt strange even before the news broke. Too quiet. Too careful. Like everybody in that house sensed something was coming but nobody knew exactly what. The dining room looked beautiful in that expensive, cold kind of way. Long black table. Crystal glasses. Soft jazz playing from hidden speakers in the ceiling. Outside, rain tapped lightly against the massive windows surrounding the estate. But nobody was really eating. Grayson kept checking his phone. Evelyn whispered constantly with one of the company attorneys. My father looked pale and distracted. And Adrian. Adrian looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Like life had spent years teaching him disappointment and he finally stopped expecting anything else. Halfway through dinner, the television suddenly interrupted regular programming. Breaking news flashed across the screen. A state energy report had confirmed one of the largest oil discoveries in Oklahoma in over 20 years. Everybody looked up immediately. The reporter started listing location coordinates and projected reserve estimates while maps appeared on the screen behind her. Then the coordinates fully loaded. And the room froze. I watched Grayson's face lose color first. Then Evelyn stood up so suddenly her chair scraped loudly across the floor. No way, she whispered. Adrian frowned slightly. The land belonged to him. Not the company. Not the Callaway estate. Him. The same dry farmland his siblings mocked for years. The same property they said was worthless. The same land Malcolm Callaway personally left to his dying son while everyone else fought over mansions and investments. The room exploded instantly. Phones ringing. Lawyers talking over each other. Executives leaving the table to make calls. My father grabbed a calculator from his briefcase like he'd been waiting for a miracle his entire life. One attorney estimated the reserve could generate hundreds of millions over time. Hundreds of millions. The energy inside the room changed immediately after that. Not joy. Greed. Pure greed. And then Evelyn finally said the sentence everyone else was already thinking. We can still transfer ownership. Silence followed. Adrian slowly lowered his fork. Nobody defended him. Nobody even pretended the conversation was inappropriate. Because suddenly his illness didn't matter anymore. Only the land did. The next afternoon both families gathered inside the Callaway conference room for an emergency meeting. Lawyers lined both sides of the room. Stacks of paperwork covered the table. Even 2 state representatives showed up halfway through discussions. The atmosphere felt ugly. Controlled. Professional. Cold. Like everyone was trying to disguise greed as business strategy. Adrian sat quietly beside me while Grayson explained how family unity mattered during important transitions. Then legal documents were pushed slowly across the table toward Adrian. We'll compensate you fairly, Grayson said smoothly. There's a smaller property in Colorado we can transfer instead. Adrian didn't touch the papers. Then Grayson made the mistake that changed everything. This family built everything you have. The room went silent instantly. Adrian slowly looked up. Calm. Tired. Done pretending. No, he said quietly. Nobody moved. My father built everything you have. Even the lawyers stopped writing. Adrian looked around the room slowly. At Grayson. At Evelyn. At my parents. At Claire sitting near the corner avoiding eye contact. Then he spoke again. At some point all of you buried me before I died. The silence afterward felt enormous. That was your mistake. Nobody moved. Nobody argued. Because deep down, every single person in that room knew he was telling the truth. And that was when I stood up. My hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear anymore. From certainty. I reached into my bag and placed a thick brown file directly onto the center of the table. The sound echoed sharply through the room. Everyone stared at me. Grayson frowned immediately and opened the file. Then his entire expression changed. My mother stood up halfway from her chair. What is that? I looked directly at both families before answering. Proof. Inside were finalized ownership transfers, mineral rights protections, and government-certified filings confirming the farmland legally belonged jointly to Adrian and me. Every signature valid. Every filing complete. Weeks before the public announcement. The room went completely silent. No phones. No lawyers talking. Nothing. Then I finally said the thing I'd been holding inside for months. I knew exactly how all of you would react the moment money touched this land. Nobody had anything left to say after that. Because for the first time since I entered the Callaway family, the powerless people in the room were no longer us. The silence after that meeting felt enormous. Not loud silence. Heavy silence. The kind that sits in the middle of a room forcing everyone to face things they spent years avoiding. Nobody screamed. Nobody flipped tables. Nobody chased after us dramatically. Honestly, that would have been easier. Instead, people just sat there staring at the documents scattered across the conference table like their entire reality had shifted in front of them. And maybe it had. The attorneys reviewed every page twice. Then a third time. Every signature valid. Every transfer legal. Every filing protected. There was nothing Grayson could do. For the first time since I met him, he looked genuinely shaken. Not angry. Not arrogant. Just cornered. Like a man realizing money couldn't bully its way through everything anymore. One of the state representatives finally cleared his throat awkwardly and said, "Well, that settles ownership." Just like that. Months of greed. Manipulation. Planning. Finished in one sentence. My father leaned back slowly in his chair staring at the floor. He looked smaller somehow. Older too. Like the pressure he spent years hiding had finally crushed him in public. My mother didn't speak at all while everyone started leaving the room. Not one word. And honestly, that scared me more than yelling would've. Because Denise Bennett always had something to say. Always. But now there was nothing left to defend. The oil rights remained legally under Adrian's control after that meeting. No loopholes. No hidden claims. No emergency family negotiations. The businesses survived separately. Barely. Bennett Industrial avoided collapse through emergency restructuring, but most of the company's reputation was already damaged. Investors pulled back quietly after rumors about the marriage arrangement started circulating among executives. The Callaways weren't doing much better. Multiple board members began questioning Grayson's leadership after learning he nearly lost one of the largest oil discoveries in the state because he dismissed the family member who legally owned it. Funny how quickly arrogance starts looking stupid once money gets involved. Claire tried acting supportive afterward. That part almost made me laugh. She started calling more often. Sending articles about energy investments. Talking about family healing during awkward dinners nobody wanted anymore. But I noticed something every single time she spoke to Adrian. She talked about the oil more than she talked about him. Even now, she still struggled separating human value from financial value. One evening she stood beside me during a charity fundraiser and quietly said, "Well, at least everything worked out in the end." I looked at her for a long moment before answering. Did it? Because somehow that sentence felt insulting. Like pain becomes acceptable as long as money appears afterward. Naomi changed more than anyone. About 2 weeks after the meeting, she drove to the guest house alone one evening carrying takeout containers from a small Thai restaurant we used to love in college. We sat outside on the porch while the sun disappeared slowly behind the fields. For almost 20 minutes she barely spoke. Then finally she looked at me and said quietly, "I should have stopped it." I stayed silent. Naomi's eyes filled slowly. "Not the marriage," she whispered. I should have stopped myself from staying quiet. That sentence hit harder than an apology. Because deep down, she was right. Silence had protected everyone except the people being hurt. Even Grayson eventually stopped pretending righteousness after multiple attorneys confirmed he had absolutely no legal claim to the land. The confidence disappeared after that. So did the superiority. And Adrian. God. For the first time since I met him, Adrian stopped looking like a man waiting to disappear. He laughed more. Slept better. Started walking the farmland again without looking exhausted afterward. It wasn't really about the oil. Not completely. It was about finally knowing his life still belonged to him. Months later, the doctors confirmed something nobody expected. Adrian's condition had stabilized significantly. The new treatments were working better than anyone predicted. His breathing improved. The coughing episodes became less frequent. And slowly, the terrifying timelines doctors once gave him started disappearing from conversations completely. The man everyone abandoned because they believed he was dying was no longer dying. Funny enough, that changed people almost as much as the oil did. Some relatives suddenly started calling more often. Some friends who disappeared quietly started reappearing. Even Grayson tried acting like a concerned brother again. But some damage changes shape without ever fully disappearing. One evening near sunset, I walked across the farmland and found Adrian repairing old fencing near the western side of the property. Orange light stretched across the fields, and the wind moved softly through the tall grass around him. He looked different. Not perfect. Not magically healed. Just alive. Real. At peace in a way I'd never seen before. I sat beside him quietly on the back of the truck while the sky turned darker above us. No dramatic speeches. No movie ending. Just silence that finally felt safe. After a while, Adrian handed me Malcolm Calloway's old survey journal. The same worn notebook that started everything. Dad used to say people ignore what's buried deep enough, Adrian said softly. I looked across the same land everyone once discarded. Then I looked at the man they discarded with it. And honestly, the oil was never the most valuable thing hidden there. He was. And for the first time since all of this began, neither of us felt unwanted anymore. If this story touched you in any way, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt valued only when people needed something from you? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share with someone who needs to hear it, and check out more emotional stories on the channel.